Hello dear YouTube viewers, I hope you're doing well. Okays, let's start our video. Daniel had always been the kind of man people trusted. He worked long hours at his job, came home at the same time each evening, and never missed Sunday dinners with his parents. To neighbors and friends, his marriage looked steady, solid, even enviable. He was the husband who remembered anniversaries, who carried groceries without complaint, who quietly saved for the future. Melissa, his wife, seemed to have everything a woman could ask for: security, stability, and a partner who adored her without conditions. But behind closed doors, the cracks had already begun to form. Melissa's smile at social gatherings hid the truth. She whispered only to herself. To her, Daniel's steady nature was suffocating. His predictability, once comforting, now felt like a chain. She wanted excitement, unpredictability, the rush of feeling desired by someone who wasn't bound by routine. While Daniel believed love was found in consistency and loyalty, Melissa felt trapped in a marriage that no longer fed her restless spirit. In small ways, her dissatisfaction showed. She sighed when Daniel repeated the same jokes, rolled her eyes when he chose quiet nights over outings, and lingered too long on her phone when he tried to talk about his day. He didn't notice, or perhaps he chose not to. For Daniel, love was about endurance, and he assumed Melissa shared that belief. But somewhere deep inside her, the hunger for attention was growing, and it would soon push their marriage into dangerous territory neither of them had foreseen. Daniel first noticed a change on a Tuesday night. Melissa didn't come home until nearly midnight, her excuse a casual, just drinks after work. She brushed it off with a quick kiss on his cheek and a laugh, as though it were nothing. Daniel wanted to believe her, but a quiet unease stirred in the back of his mind. Melissa had never been the type to linger out late, especially not on weeknights. At first, he convinced himself it was harmless. People went out with colleagues all the time, and Melissa had always been social. Still, the late nights began to repeat, once a week, then twice, then more. Each time, she carried the same easy explanation, her voice dismissive whenever he asked for details. "Don't be ridiculous, Daniel. It's just drinks." One evening, as he walked past the kitchen, he overheard her speaking on the phone. Her laughter floated through the air, lighter, younger, and far too flirtatious. The way she said, "You always know how to make me smile," sent a sharp pang through his chest. That wasn't how a wife laughed with co-workers. For the first time, the thought of betrayal crept into his mind. He wanted to confront her, but his heart wasn't ready to believe it. Trust, after all, was the foundation of their marriage, and Daniel clung to it desperately, even as doubt began to grow like a shadow he couldn't shake. Daniel couldn't hold the question back any longer. For nights he had lain awake, staring at the ceiling while Melissa scrolled endlessly on her phone beside him, smiling at messages she wouldn't share. One evening, as she slipped her heels off after another unexplained late return, he finally asked, his voice heavier than he intended, "Are you seeing someone else?" The words hung between them, sharp and dangerous. Melissa froze for a moment, then let out a scoff. "Unbelievable. So now I can't have a life without you accusing me of cheating? Do you realize how controlling you sound?" Her eyes narrowed, her tone sharpened like a knife. Daniel's chest tightened. He hadn't accused. He had only asked. I need to know the truth," he said quietly. But she didn't answer. She turned away, tossing her bag onto the couch, muttering under her breath about how suffocating he was becoming. When he pressed again, she looked at him, not with denial or guilt, but with a small, dangerous smirk that chilled him to the core. It wasn't the face of a woman pleading innocence. It was the look of someone who knew she held power, someone daring him to push further. Daniel's heart sank. The lack of denial was louder than any confession. For the first time, fear lodged itself deep inside him. Not just fear of losing her, but fear of what she had already become. The argument began like so many before it. Melissa snapping about Daniel's questions, Daniel pleading for honesty. But this night, the tension boiled over. His voice shook as he demanded, "Just tell me the truth, Melissa. I can't live like this anymore." She slammed her glass onto the counter, eyes blazing. "You want the truth? Fine. Yes. I've been with your friends. At least they know how to treat a woman." The words hit him harder than any physical blow could. Daniel staggered back, his breath caught in his throat. His friends, men he had trusted, laughed with, invited into his home, men he had believed were brothers. The betrayal wasn't just from his wife. It was from the very circle that had formed the foundation of his world. His mind reeled with images, birthdays, barbecues, late-night talks with those same friends. All of it, poisoned now by her confession. He felt sick, his stomach twisting as though the ground itself had vanished beneath him. Melissa wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her tone dripping with disdain. "If you can't handle it, then leave. I deserve better than this pathetic routine you call marriage. Real men don't whine about loyalty. They just know how to keep a woman satisfied." Daniel's hands trembled, not with rage but with devastation. In that moment, he realized the woman standing before him was no longer the wife he had married, but a stranger who had chosen to burn everything they had built together. Daniel's world collapsed in silence. The days after Melissa's confession felt like walking through ruins. Every memory of his marriage and his friendships now tainted. The men he had once trusted no longer called, no longer stopped by. When they did cross his path, their eyes fell to the ground, heavy with guilt. Their absence spoke louder than any apology could. They had betrayed him and couldn't bear to face the wreckage they had helped create. Left alone, Daniel began to withdraw. He skipped gatherings, ignored invitations, and spent long evenings staring at the walls of a house that no longer felt like home. Conversations with Melissa turned into cold exchanges, her presence in the room carrying more weight than her absence ever could. Melissa, however, seemed untouched by shame. She carried herself with arrogance, as though her betrayal had elevated her. At dinners, she made cutting remarks about Daniel's lack of ambition, her tone mocking, her eyes glittering with superiority. To her, the power was in the fact that she could wound him, and he still stayed. Daniel's self-worth began to crumble. He looked in the mirror and no longer saw the steady, dependable man he once took pride in being. Instead, he saw weakness staring back at him. Was he less of a man because he couldn't keep his wife's attention? The question haunted him, eating away at the last fragile threads of his confidence. It was late one evening when Daniel's phone buzzed with a message from Mark, one of the friends he had once considered a brother. Against his better judgment, Daniel agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe. When Mark arrived, he looked worn, guilt carved deep into his face. "I need to tell you the truth," Mark began, his voice low. "Melissa," she pushed it. "She told us you wouldn't care, that you were too weak to notice. She made it a game, daring us, almost taunting us into it. I was stupid enough to believe her." Daniel sat in silence, his hands clenched under the table. Every word twisted the knife deeper. Whether Melissa had manipulated them or not, his friends had chosen betrayal. They had crossed a line no apology could erase. Mark's eyes brimmed with shame. "I regret it, every second of it. She used us, Daniel. We were nothing to her, just pawns in whatever twisted idea she has about proving herself. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking, can you ever forgive me?" The question hung between them like a heavy fog. Daniel wanted to believe there was still loyalty left in the world, but the wound was too raw. In Mark's face he saw regret, yet in his heart, all he could feel was betrayal. Torn between his longing for closure and the weight of his anger, Daniel gave no answer. His silence spoke louder than words ever could. Daniel found himself at his parents' house one Sunday afternoon, the same house where he had spent countless dinners with Melissa by his side. This time, he came alone. His mother immediately noticed the heaviness in his expression, the way his shoulders slumped as though carrying an invisible weight. She didn't pry. She simply placed a hand on his arm and guided him inside. Later, sitting at the kitchen table with his sister, he finally opened up. The words came haltingly at first: Melissa's late nights, her confession, the betrayal with his own friends. His sister listened without interruption, her eyes steady and unflinching. When he finished, she leaned forward and said firmly, "Daniel, a marriage without respect is a prison. You've been holding on because you think love means endurance. But love without respect isn't love, it's chains." Her words pierced through his fog of despair. For weeks, he had been questioning himself. wondering if Melissa's actions were proof of his own inadequacy as a husband, as a man. But hearing his sister's voice, clear, unwavering, made him pause. He began to realize that Melissa's betrayal wasn't a reflection of his weakness, but of her emptiness. Her hunger for validation, her reckless need for control, were battles within herself. Slowly, Daniel felt a small flicker of clarity. The shame he carried wasn't his to bear. Melissa seemed almost gleeful when Daniel confronted her the next evening. Her eyes sparkled with a dangerous light, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "You still don't get it, do you?" she said, her tone dripping with superiority. "Monogamy is outdated. Real men can handle sharing. If you truly loved me, you wouldn't be so insecure about who I spend my time with." Daniel's chest tightened. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't ashamed. Instead, she twisted his concern into a flaw, turning him into the villain in her narrative. Every word she spoke chipped away at his patience. "You've never been ambitious enough," Melissa continued, pacing the living room like a predator surveying its territory. "I deserve better than the routine you offer, better than nights staring at the same ceiling, better than a man who thinks stability is enough. I need excitement, power, passion, and clearly, that's not you." Her words hit Daniel with brutal clarity. This wasn't about love, at least not in the way he understood it. She wasn't yearning for connection or partnership. She was craving dominance, control, and the thrill of making him feel inadequate. Daniel felt a cold resolve begin to take root. He had tried to give her loyalty and faithfulness, but Melissa's desires had nothing to do with him. They were about her own emptiness. Understanding that truth was painful, but it also gave him the first real sense of freedom he had felt in months. Daniel was coming home early from work when he noticed Melissa's phone buzzing on the counter. Curiosity and a lingering sense of dread compelled him to glance at the screen. His heart sank as he saw the messages. A flirtatious exchange with another friend, arranging to meet at a hotel later that evening. He waited until she returned, his hands clenched at his sides. When Melissa walked through the door, radiant and unconcerned, he didn't hesitate. "Who are you meeting tonight?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with steel. Melissa looked at him and laughed, a sharp, careless sound that cut through him like glass. "Oh, Daniel," she said, tossing her hair over her shoulder, "see? You'll never leave me. You're too weak to walk away. You always forgive. You always wait. And yet you still care too much. Pathetic, isn't it?" Her words were meant to wound, and for a moment, they succeeded. Daniel felt the familiar pang of helplessness creep back, the same one that had haunted him since her first betrayal. But tonight, something inside him shifted. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. Instead, he nodded slowly, the decision settling in his chest with quiet finality. He would no longer allow her to manipulate or belittle him. He would not let her define his worth. That night, Daniel resolved to reclaim his life, silently promising himself that the next move would be his, and his alone. Daniel didn't respond the way Melissa expected. She continued her taunts, her laughter filling the room, but he remained silent, his face a mask of calm that hid the storm inside. Each barb she threw bounced off him, leaving no mark. She leaned in closer, her eyes searching for a crack, but there was none. In that silence, Daniel began to strategize. He reviewed their finances, quietly transferring accounts and making sure he had control over his own future. He contacted a lawyer, gathering information about divorce proceedings and protecting his assets. He requested copies of counseling records, knowing that documentation could support his case if needed. Every move was deliberate, careful, building the framework for a life without her, a life in which he held the power. Melissa misread his quiet resolve as weakness. She laughed, smug and self-satisfied, certain that he had been broken by her manipulations. "See, you always cave," she said, running her fingers through her hair. "You'll never leave me." But Daniel's mind was far from surrender. Beneath the surface, determination surged. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of control, a clarity he hadn't experienced since before the betrayals began. His silence was not defeat. It was the calm before the storm, the careful preparation for his ultimate freedom. Soon, he would no longer be bound by her games. Word of Melissa's actions began to seep through the community like wildfire. Whispers started at neighborhood gatherings, in cafes, and even at Daniel's workplace. People who had once admired her charm and confidence now exchanged cautious glances, unsure whether to confront the truth or merely observe from a distance. The polished image she had so carefully maintained was cracking, revealing the selfish, manipulative side she had tried to hide. Daniel's family watched closely, their concern turning into quiet validation of the doubts they had harbored all along. Friends and neighbors who had once greeted Melissa with smiles now avoided her, or met her with polite distance. Slowly, the reality of her betrayal became undeniable. People began to question the choices they had made in trusting her, seeing for themselves the woman who had caused pain in the life of someone they respected. Even the friends who had once betrayed Daniel were not immune to the shift. Mark, and the others, felt the weight of their own complicity. Their influence waned, their apologies sounding hollow to anyone who remembered their betrayal. Melissa, who had thrived on admiration and control, started to sense the erosion of her power. Invitations dwindled, friendly nods became scarce, and conversations in her presence grew strained. The charisma she had wielded as a weapon no longer held sway. For the first time, she confronted the consequences of her actions, not through Daniel, but through the eyes of the community that had once celebrated her. Daniel walked into the living room, carrying a neat stack of papers, his posture calm but unyielding. Melissa looked up from her phone, her expression initially amused. "What's that?" she asked, curiosity laced with a hint of arrogance. He placed the papers on the coffee table and met her gaze evenly. "Divorce papers," he said simply. No anger, no accusation, just the quiet authority of a man who had made a decision. For the first time since their confrontation began, Melissa's confident smirk faltered. Her eyes widened, and she blinked, clearly unprepared for this turn of events. "You wouldn't dare leave me," she said, her voice wavering between disbelief and indignation. Daniel remained composed. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind countless times, but the reality was sharper, cleaner, and far more liberating than he had imagined. "You deserve better? Fine. Go find it. I deserve peace," he said, his words steady, carrying the weight of months of betrayal, heartbreak, and careful planning. Melissa opened her mouth, searching for a retort, but no words came. The arrogance and control she had wielded so easily now felt powerless against his newfound resolve. In that quiet, charged space, Daniel finally felt free. For the first time in months, he could breathe without the shadow of her manipulations pressing down on him. The papers weren't just legal. They were symbolic of reclaiming his life, his dignity, and his right to walk away from a marriage that had become a prison. Without Daniel's steady presence, Melissa's carefully curated life began to unravel. The confidence she had relied on to command attention and manipulate those around her faltered. Invitations to social events dwindled, and the friends who had once followed her lead drifted away, no longer interested in her games or entangled in her drama. The charm she had wielded as a weapon lost its effect, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. People who had once admired her began to see the truth behind the mask. Conversations about her, once whispered with awe, now carried judgment and caution. Her reputation as a confident, desirable woman crumbled, replaced by whispers of toxicity and betrayal. Even her closest allies, those she had thought loyal, started to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with the chaos she created. Melissa, however, seemed oblivious at first, continuing to flaunt the lifestyle she thought she controlled. But the emptiness grew undeniable as her attempts to regain attention fell flat. No one called. No one waited for her texts with eager anticipation, and the thrill of power she had once felt now felt hollow. Finally, in quiet moments of reflection, the harsh reality hit her. The one man who had truly loved her, who had remained loyal, who had valued her beyond superficiality, was gone. Daniel had walked away with dignity, leaving her to confront the consequences of her choices. For the first time, Melissa understood the depth of what she had lost, and it was too late to reclaim it. In the weeks following the divorce, Daniel turned his attention inward, determined to rebuild the pieces of his life that Melissa's betrayal had shattered. He threw himself into work, taking on new responsibilities and exploring opportunities he had once ignored. The challenge reinvigorated him, reminding him of his capabilities and potential. Alongside professional growth, Daniel sought emotional healing. Therapy sessions helped him untangle the complex feelings of anger, grief, and betrayal. He began to understand that trusting someone did not make him weak. It made him human. Through journaling, meditation, and reconnecting with old hobbies he had abandoned, Daniel discovered joy in small, unpressured moments. Painting, long evening runs, and quiet weekends reading became anchors, grounding him in the present and restoring his sense of self. As he regained confidence, Daniel found himself cautiously open to new relationships. He didn't rush. He simply allowed the possibility of connection to exist, understanding that love, without respect or honesty, was never worth pursuing. Most importantly, Daniel's dignity became his foundation. Every decision, every step forward, was guided by self-respect rather than fear or revenge. He had learned that strength wasn't about control over others. It was the quiet power of knowing his worth and refusing to compromise it. Slowly but surely, Daniel's shattered world transformed into one of resilience, clarity, and hope for the future. Weeks later, Daniel received a message that made his pulse quicken. A text from Melissa, broken and pleading. She wanted to meet, to explain, to somehow reclaim what she had lost. Against the temptation to confront her or reopen old wounds, he agreed to see her one last time, determined that this encounter would have boundaries. When she arrived, her eyes were red, her confident facade shattered. "Daniel, I was wrong. I need you," she stammered, her voice trembling. He looked at her calmly, seeing not the woman he had loved, but the person who had caused him months of pain and disillusionment. "Melissa," he said, steady and resolute, "I left not because I was weak, but because I wanted peace. Peace I couldn't have while staying in a life that eroded my dignity." Her lips quivered, searching for a retort, but none came. Daniel realized that love alone is never enough if respect and honesty are absent. He understood now that sometimes dignity means walking away, even from the people you once cherished most. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the sunlight spilling across the street, feeling the weight of the past lifting with every step. Melissa remained behind, her hands empty, her power gone. Daniel moved forward into a brighter future, one built on self-respect and clarity. The life he had envisioned, free, unburdened, and full of possibilities, awaited him, while Melissa became a lesson of what it truly meant to value oneself above all else. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please subscribe our channel.